gathering. Obviously, knowing that today and this year we are commemorating 30 years of democracy in South Africa. This is not just a celebration of nation pride, it's not just a celebration of the journey of freedom, but in essence it's trying to lay out the things that we should be careful of for the future, but also things that we can learn from in terms of what has happened in the past. And for me, such gatherings are really quite heartwarming because we invest a lot in the world of AI and we do very little for HI, which is human intelligence. And gatherings like these allow us to basically feed the AI with contextualized, factual conversations. And I hope that conversations and the dialogues from today will allow us to deposit more factual news towards ensuring that our AI and our accuracies are up to par. So with much further ado, I would actually just like to allow Dr. Vern Harris, the acting CEO and the moderator of the discussion for today, about 30 years of democracy in South Africa, resilience and reflection and innovation. If you can give him a round of applause to come and welcome us.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Nelson Mandela Foundation. It's good to see you all. I must apologize, our air conditioning broke down, so you might start getting a bit hot. My voice is overused today. I've been talking all day long. I apologize for that. It's a real honor to be hosting this event today, the World Movement for Democracy. It's great to be working with you. Please feel at home. I'm hoping that we can get a real conversation going. Madiba used this room often, and he gave us a mandate to use this room for dialogue. He was very clear on what he meant by dialogue. It's not a chat. Chat is when you all agree with one another. So hopefully we can get a bit of a debate going. I think the topic is hot, and I'm going to invite our panelists to come up and then we start with the conversation. Thank you. Is this work? You can hear me? Yes. So, the theme for today's conversation is 30 years of democracy in South Africa, reflecting on that, what it means. And we're hoping to inject an international dimension to that because I think globally it is a question too. Where is democracy landing? What are the challenges confronting democracy as an idea, as a practice? I think this thing is moving around, but you'll tell me if you need to adjust the sound. So, before I introduce the panel, 30 years ago, I was in government here, and Madiba was president of our country, and we were upbeat. In my department, our first Director General was 29 years old. We longed for those days, youngsters. And we knew that we were dealing with massive damage in our society. We knew that we had not had a revolution, we had negotiated a settlement, and there would be a long process of transformation. It might take generations. But reflecting back from today, I think we were all seduced by Madiba in that moment to think we can fix things quite quickly. And very often that led us into errors of judgment, mistakes. We often try to implement models, strategies from the global north. Our education system, we tried to transform the apartheid education systems with Australian and Canadian models. They didn't work too well. So we made mistakes. But I think it is fair to say that that first administration put in place a range, a medley of instruments for continuing work. And the critical instruments for me were all about restitution, reparation, and redistribution. I left government in 2001, and I came into civil society, I was disillusioned. And I was convinced that I was now part of a government that wasn't committed to transformation. And in civil society at that time, there was no notion of working with government. Government in many ways was the problem. I moved here in 2004, and today at the Nelson Mandela Foundation we work with government on a whole range of projects. In fact, downstairs we have government officials who basically work here every day, and that's because we're looking for a new praxis, one that will make democracy work for the great majority of our people. So when I think about 30 years of democracy, you will appreciate I feel a bit ambivalent. And I'm hoping, and I'm looking forward to this conversation, because I think we're going to get some insights in terms of what we make of it. And it's not only what we make of where we've landed. The critical question really is, what do we do moving forward? What is the strategy? So without further ado, let me introduce you to our panel. Dr. Mamphela Ramphele. She doesn't need introduction really. So author, thinker, and sort of overall mover and shaker. Former Vice Chancellor of University of Cape Town, senior position in the World Bank. I got to know you 20 years ago as a trustee of the Nelson Mandela Foundation. I missed those board meetings. I was scared of Doc. We called her Doc. Missed those robust debates. Then next to her we have Dr. Mamphela, who is also an author. And please, if you want to revisit Fees Must Fall, he wrote a wonderful book about Fees Must Fall, and was involved in both Roads Must Fall and Fees Must Fall. Now a lecturer at the University of the Witwatersrand. I got to know him as a fellow student of my son's. So you were young and fresh. Yeah. And then, of course, Maria Ressa, who is a journalist we all respect deeply, and the organization that you co-founded, the work that it does, also Nobel Peace Prize winner, of course. I met her this morning, and we've been in some very interesting conversations. By the way, she's the first person I've given a guided tour to. When I invited her, would you like to hold Madiba's Nobel Peace Prize medal? I said, no, it's not appropriate. So a sensitivity that so many people don't have. Really appreciate that. So let's get into the conversation. So we'll first have a conversation here, and then we'll open it up and see where it goes. Doc, I'm going to ask you first. It's easy to do the critique of where we are as a country. It's easy to do a critique, perhaps globally, of how democracy is failing so many people. But let's start by thinking about what can we celebrate. And it's a question to the Nelson Mandela Foundation. So what are you doing to celebrate 30 years of democracy? So what is it that we can be pleased with, that we can say we got right and is working?
Thank you very much, Ben, and thanks to the Foundation for hosting my sister and for this conversation. What we can celebrate, unambiguous, is the foundation we laid for our democracy. There aren't many countries in the world that have got the kind of constitutional framework that was negotiated. But I want to add a very important rider. It wasn't the negotiation. It was the quality of the people who wrestled through the questions. And it wasn't just people from exile, or people from inside, or people from the ANC, or people from this party. It was a moment, thanks to Madiba Magic, that people felt we have one chance to get this right. And it wasn't a quick process. It was a laborious process. But one thing that Madiba had was wisdom. And so when people were jumping up and down, they said, I hear you, but you've got to think about the next generations. But also, his experience of having negotiated with what was an untouchable regime and not feeling that I can't talk to them. As you said, dialogue is not about talking to your friends. It is talking to people you disagree with fundamentally, because there's something bigger, larger, something that is beyond you, something that will matter not just for your generation, but generations to come. He had that incredible sense of history. But also, I believe, the process of negotiations that he went through as a prisoner, negotiating with his jailers, was possible because he saw beyond the jailer. He saw people. It was his capacity to see past the abusive, brutal operative of the system to see the people. And so the process of negotiating our constitution was really about learning anew what it means to be human. Because we often forget, we wear these badges and this and that, and as they say in Afrikaans, of the old ends. At the end of the day, it is our humanity that matters. And the beautiful thing about being human is that we are wired to be connected and interdependent. And it is Madiba's traditional upbringing which helped him to keep that alive. And of course his friendship with Walter Sisulu, one of my favorite old men, was exactly that focus on the human and the humanity of people, regardless of who they are. They are children, they are old people, they are poor, they are rich. And so I think the most important achievement of our democracy is not only having agreed to that constitution, but in using it as a guide. When the water view hits the fan, you go back there and check what does the constitution say about this. And another thing we have to celebrate is our constitutional courts. The judicial system in this country has done an amazing job. We will be very remiss not to celebrate them. I mean, I used to watch Justice Zondo day in, day out, listening to things that would destroy your soul. But he was very focused on his responsibility as a judge. Not who he likes, what he likes to hear. No. And he has demonstrated, even after the Zondo Commission, his commitment. And he keeps prodding. He keeps challenging the executive to be true to what they promised that they would do. The one tragedy of all of us, because I think with the constitution that we have, in the constitutional court and the judicial system we've got, we could have been on the other side of the pond, as we call it, the Atlantic Ocean, in terms of progress. One big mistake. We focus on the institutions and forgot that human beings are spirits mind, and body. And so we did not use the power, the beauty of the Constitution to help people to embrace it at the spiritual level, not when they are fighting, no. At the time when they are saying, how am I to deal with Vern who doesn't seem to understand how to talk to people? It's not a matter for fighting, it's a matter for discussion. And so my big disappointment is how we failed, and again, you always, you use models from the North. How on earth can you have people, both black and white, none of us had any experience of democracy. Here we have a Rolls Royce in the garage, and there's no driver's license and lessons to help drive this Rolls Royce. I mean, this was such an obvious thing to do. And the other, of course, celebration for me is some of the members of that first cabinet. My gosh, amazing. I still call him my minister, Minister Kada Asma, because I spoke to him afterwards to say, Minister, you have done a great job with this constitution and all of the institutional frameworks that you've forgotten one thing, the software. If we do not make sure that our children from ECD all the way to university learn about what it means to be a South African citizen, we are unlicensed drivers. And you know what happens. And so that's my sense. We have a great foundation, great people, but we need to do more work on the software.
Thank you. So when I think of 30 as a number to recognize and mark, I'm reminded of Madiba's promise to all of us in 1994 to transfer 30% of white-owned land to black South Africans by the end of his presidency. And then, very quickly, he came back publicly to say, look, it's going to take a bit longer, but we are committing to 2014. By 2014, 30% of land. Now, when we reached 2014, we had got to 9%. Today, we're stuck at 9%. And it's kind of, it's something that I wrestle with, is that whatever else Madiba was doing, and that leadership, top priority was to make democracy stick. And now, we're stuck, we feel stuck. And so, Dr. Chikane, I'm asking you.
So many things to say. I just want to preface this by first saying that what I say here, I would say to my own dad, right? Because he was in the room at the time, right? He was in the room when people were thinking about what is this country going to look like in one way or another.
Can you not hear at the back? No? Could we have one of the hand mics from the side? Thank you. Oh, is it on?
I'll just project and not loud. Okay.
I got you. Oh. Sorry.
Cool. Hopefully you can hear. Yeah. Okay, cool. Perfect. So whatever I say, I would say to my own dad, right? Because it's going to feel like I'm being rude, but I'm not, because I would say it to him, and I would never be rude to him in any particular way. So whenever we have conversations about the good things, and these many, many good things about 30 years of democracy, right? There's this horrible case that's currently in trial about a guy called Piet Groenewald, I'm not sure if anyone's been following this. This is an individual who killed people in 1919, just shot them. Killed them, ran away to Portugal. Right? White Afrikaans guy killed two black people in cold blood. Went to jail, came out, finally has his freedom, and within 2 years takes one of his assault dogs and attacks one of his workers with it over an argument and goes back to jail. The beauty of our democracy is that people like Piet Groenewald do not show their faces in society anymore. Right? That's an obvious fact. Another one is that I grew up in a fairly good country that gave me opportunities. I won't get too political about those opportunities, right? Where I could freely interact with as many people as possible. I can date whoever I want to date. I can go into whatever area I want to go into. There is no arbitrary barrier to my access to freedom. But a disclaimer that I have is that there are arbitrary barriers to people being able to self-determine. And it's a point I've been really grappling with over the last kind of 2 years. This difference between having freedoms and being able to self-determine in the context of South Africa. South Africa gave us freedoms. The Constitution gives us freedoms. But the numbers of the state of the country that describe the state of the country show us that people aren't able to self-determine. If you were born in poverty in this country, you will die in poverty. The numbers don't lie about it. We have 55% of the country living on 700 rand a month. I love using this because often people don't know how to the extent of inequality in the country. In any ordinary country, most people generally know the average wage of a teacher, right, in South Africa. The average wage of a teacher in South Africa is about 20,000 rand. We're all on the same page. If you earn 20,000 rand per month in our country, you're part of the top 5% income earners in the country. Right? It means our teachers on paper are the top 5% income earners in the country. Right? There's nothing wrong about teachers. Teachers should 100% be compensated. But there's no country in the world where that happens in any particular way. So then I ask the question of these goods that the Constitution gives us, the institutions that it gives us. And I'll never bash, I think it's too easy to bash the Constitution, right? It's like revisionist history. The way I start thinking about the Constitution is about asking, where has it gone wrong after the fact? Things you could just never predict 30 years ago when you were at the negotiating table. Things you could never predict 30 years later. Is our Constitution up to the standard of dealing with these unintended consequences of society? And one of the biggest aspects is that our Constitution has failed to evolve with the political culture of our country. The way our Constitution is designed is that there is absolutely no form of public participation in our country where a politician is incentivized to listen to people. Absolutely zero. Whether it's in Mbizo, whether it's going to Parliament, you can give all your submissions to Parliament. And if they don't listen to you, there's no consequences to it. We believe that we could vote them out. We have no evidence of us showing and using that power in a particular way. And even if that's your power, then you have to wait 5 years to do it. Right? We have a city that has now had 3 mayors in the last 5 years. But 7 mayors, 2 passed away, but 7, 9 mayors in ridiculous ways. We've never had a snap election for the city. I just need everyone to acknowledge that power has changed in the city multiple times, but none of us have the ability to demand that there should be a snap election in the city because no one has a mandate from us. Right? So our Constitution was beautiful at the time, but it is now starting to show its cracks. But the beauty of our Constitution is that it has held us together. We're one of the most resilient countries I've ever encountered. There are things that happen in our country that when they happen in other countries, those countries implode. Right? From the killing of Andreas Statani, the fact that you can have the Marikana massacre and no one blinks an eye. No consequences are had. We keep it moving. The fact that you can have students in 2015 marching on a international airport saying we're going to shut this down. We're the only protest movement where a demand is given on the Monday. I think I've said this to Bern before. Where a demand is made on the Monday, and on the Friday evening of that same week, the president is on national TV giving into that demand. Not a single drop of blood. But the country is resilient. It understands how to keep moving. We literally had a July unrest, the closest to an insurrection we could possibly have, and most of the country is forgotten about it. That tells us our constitution is strong and there's deep respect for it. But at the same time, this constitution allows South Africa not to change in a manner that allows people to self-determine, to choose a life, as Amartya Sen would say, that they deem valuable to themselves. So the question that gets posed, at least from my generation, is what's the purpose of this freedom if I can't really experience it for the vast majority? And that's a question we have to answer. And we can get into it later. Sometimes the biggest gatekeepers of allowing us to answer that question of how we self-determine are those who helped design the Constitution in the first place. And it sucks. It really sucks, because now it seems like you're ungrateful for the freedoms. It seems like you're ungrateful for what was given to you. It seems like you're ungrateful for like the changes that were made in the country, and somehow it is our fault that something's wrong. When I say, you use the word software, doctor, when there's something faulty with the hardware. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm going to save this word for later. But it speaks to this idea that I think for me in particular, when I think about the beauty of the country, it's the fact that we can have a conversation, at least in my mind right now, that young people are having across the country about what a new South Africa looks like. And this is not a new thing in world politics. People have heard me say this before in this room. But the fact that we can debate the idea of having a second republic in the country is a fascinating idea without a single drop of blood being dropped. Because if we don't have that conversation, someone's going to hijack the process. And I don't think our constitution is built to deal with the mini coup d'etat of sorts of people who are just angry because they can't self-determine even though they've been given freedoms.
So Maria, looking at South Africa from your vantage point, we've stopped thinking of ourselves, I think, as exceptional. We've had to learn the hard way that, we can't do things that other countries just could not do. We have to go through those long, hard processes. But we do like to think that we deserve attention from the rest of the world because of what we're trying to do here. And so it's maybe a question for you then specifically, is looking at South Africa, are there lessons to be learned from, not only, we always talk about the past, the liberation struggle and so on, the transition, but from what we're doing right now?
First of all, there are so many people I need to thank you so much for download. Should I go on the mic? I can do that too. All right, let me do that because it may be easier. Here we go. Rolf, I feel like I've just walked into living history because everything I've known about South Africa. I think I was saying the last time I was here when Mike Hanna was still the bureau chief in Joburg, in Cape Town. I was just there last year, talking to news heads about how we survived this crisis. There were so many in the last few days, Paul, Rolf, Phone, so many generous people, in addition to the fantastic insights. But let me say, I think I understand the statistics. They're not great. I would say as a journalist, they're bad, considering it's 30 years, right? The unemployment rate, I think, both whether it's a tight definition or a large definition, but more than that, I think you beat yourselves up a lot. And it may be, I'll put it in the context of having gone through several of these in different countries. In the Philippines, when we had a people power revolt, in Indonesia, where Indonesians ended 32 years of Suharto's rule on Feb 14, and it looks like they're about to elect in the son-in-law, former President Suharto, right? So it is, in both of those countries, it's back to the future. History has played a role in this, so memory is really significantly important. In East Timor, where the rebels became power and maybe didn't quite know exactly how to handle power. I think South Africa, the constitution you point to, the institutions you built, ma'am, I feel like the Philippines did the opposite. We did personality-centric politics. I wish we did institutions. We have been trying to build institutions. Thank you for giving me the privilege to talk to you about this incredible country that actually is I'm going to use Madiba's own words in this phenomenal letter that you said. Where does it go wrong? Right? It's very easy to pull it up to political parties or to systems. Yes, those are there, but it's at the cellular level. In this letter where it was actually when he was writing a book while he was president, he had many phrases that were stunning to me because he was talking about the people he received power, the people he got power with, and he was talking about what happens when you do get power, when you become arrogant. And I guess this I'm shifting towards when you use power for your own sake, or what we all have. In my 39 years as a journalist, I follow the money, corruption, right? So he came down to that. I'll give you another country that actually had a leader who came in and put his friends in jail for corruption. Singapore, right? It's a country where I literally, this is my experience, I dropped my wallet on the streets, and they gave it back to me. There are things, I think so to end with that, you know your country better than I do. But I will tell you, in my darkest times, 2 South Africans I read Biko. At the time when I was facing almost a century in jail for doing my job, I read Biko, the book, and I read Long Road to Freedom. So at the very long walk, road, cars. I guess this is the last part. This is a critical moment and a critical time. And I think where South Africa goes, like 50% of the world, we're going to be voting in 2024. Where you go, you will shift Africa. And so that's a lot of responsibility for you. Wonderful to hear the voices of the youth. Your median age is 28 years old, 30. In the Philippines, it's 23 years old. Right? You have 60 million people, we have 112 million people. And from what you said, it's really the institutions. You have to hold tight to them. Audrey, thank you for telling me yesterday of social justice. Right? Those go back to that. But long answer to me, this is the time. You know everything that's wrong. You're living through it. The question, of course, is what are you going to do about it? And the thing that's guided me through some of the worst of times, the Philippines is Asia's largest Roman Catholic nation. So it's a very simple, the Serenity Prayer. What is it within my control? And whatever is in my control, I will push. What isn't in my control? What isn't in your control? You can get rid of what's not in your control by working together, by collaborating. And then God grant me the wisdom to know the difference.
So Maria named, I think you used the words, this critical moment. And so, Doc, I'm going to ask you, what does this moment mean? And think both in terms of South Africa but globally, because personally, making sense of the world I live in is becoming more and more difficult. And in the position I've been holding in the last 9 months or so, it's a question for the institution. You have to understand the moment that we're in order to understand what is our task. And you've got to be very clear on what your task is. But it's not easy. What does this moment mean for you?
I'm here at 76 and absolutely determined to make sure we do grasp the opportunities of this moment. Because I lost too many friends. We sacrificed our youth for this freedom. And to start with, if you are lost, go home. Don't try and run around trying to go back to the beginning. The story about self-determination and the statistics that absolutely. The story about your regard for looking at the Constitution as unmovable or is not as flexible as it should be, is exactly the problem I referred to. That we are unlicensed drivers of the Rolls Royce, right? The agreement at the negotiation was that it wasn't supposed to be a made once and for all. The government of Madiba set up the Van Zyl-Slabbert Commission to deal with all of these things we are talking about. But their Royal Highnesses, who were then in charge, ignored the imperatives of changing the electoral system so you could do exactly what you're talking about. But we, the people, were so seduced that we didn't back the commission. We just said, and of course, if we had done it then, your generation would have had greater flexibility. We all would have had greater flexibility. But the issue is not to dwell on that. There is a second point which we must touch on, because these statistics you are talking about are a reflection of the negotiation process was about the political settlement. And Madiba, I want to give him credit here and now. He understood this before he was released from Victor Verster, that a political settlement is not going to do it. We need to understand the socio-economic system we are coming back to, which, having lived in or been in prison for 27 years, others like Thabo, they left there when they were 15. So people went into exile and came back to a country they no longer knew. Madiba's response was, we have to tap into the wonderful South African people to help us raise the questions, whether it's the land. You can't just declare that you shall return at 30%. You have to create a socio-economic framework, which was not included. Now, it was at the same time that Germany was reunifying. And those of us who were living here, said to Madiba and whoever would listen, let's take a leaf out of that. Recognize that too great a degree of inequality makes human community impossible. Now that we wrote with Francis Wilson in 1989. But then we saw a man who was not a radical. Helmut Kohl was a conservative, but he was a smart man. He understood the software, that they were all Germans. But if some Germans live in Bishop's Court or Sandton and others live in Alex, you don't have a country, you don't have a nation. You can sing it, you can do your rugby matches. And so, this moment is a moment for us to acknowledge the gains, acknowledge the missteps, and seize the moment. I would like to see this generation my concern with them was how they wanted things to fall. They didn't tell me what was to stand. Roads fell, the fees fell, and then what? You now have to rise to the opportunities, because when we started the Black Consciousness Movement, we were in our early 20s. I was literally less than 20. And we found the self-determination. We asked ourselves the fundamental question: how is it possible that 90 plus people can be held hostage, in bondage, for 300 plus years by less than 10%? And we found that. That's why I talk about the software. The answer is here. It's here. I mean, you see how considerably strong I am. But the minute we recognize that freedom, liberation is inside out, you cannot be a freedom fighter that's effective, that then become an effective leader of your country if you are not free inside. And that inside freedom is about recognizing that the human race is the most exciting race. There's no other race. We're human. We are all unique. So I can't compete with you or with Vern. No, I have to appreciate and this is another thing Madiba had. Fantastic. Appreciate the strengths that other people bring that complement yours. And of course, acknowledge your weaknesses. And then you can manage them. Okay? So I really believe that this work of inside-out liberation is vital. Women in this country are going through a tsunami of gender-based violence. Why? Because we have embraced masculinity as the norm. It is when we threw away the non-whites, the non-European, that we stood up and said we are black, we are proud, and we are Africans, and this country is going to be changed to become an African country. As Steve Biko put it more elegantly, we are committed to giving this world a more human face. And that face has to come from Africa, which is the cradle of humanity and the cradle of the first human civilization. We are not leveraging this entitlement, this heritage, this greatness that we come from. So, ask me, I am on top of the world in terms of the possibilities. I can see the possibility of you, your generation, failing to grab this moment. Cut out your dad. He's done his job. Do your job.
Yeah. You were saying earlier that your generation's been knocking on the door. It's their moment, but why has it not?
Yeah, I'm going to repeat a point that I said earlier, because it wasn't hyperbole. So I'll repeat it again. There isn't a single public participation mechanism in this country outside of the vote that incentivizes politicians to care about citizens. Right? Not a single one. Right? You can look across the board. There isn't one where a politician has, if I had to erase my dad, it doesn't strike the fear of God in a politician. Because the incentive structure of the political system is not designed to be incentivized to citizens' responses. It is incentivized to be responsive to my political party, right? With the hope that the political party somehow, some way, becomes responsive to citizens. But if the Constitution is designed in such a way that the political party doesn't have to be responsive to citizens outside of the vote, then the entire system becomes perverted. I like talking about the architecture of the Constitution, things you just couldn't predict. The political culture of political parties today is fundamentally different from where it was 30 years ago. And you could never have predicted it. The selfishness, the self-interest, the ability to steal, the ability to accept the fact that a child can die in a pit retreat. That's the political culture that we have, and there's no accountability for it. So the question then becomes, well then how do you change it? Now, if we found that true self-determination, like my parents had, well then we had a little period called the 1980s in South Africa. Right? That real bubbling of unrest, that real bubbling of anger. And people often say, well, that doesn't happen in South Africa. When I say, we just finished writing a book last year around protests in South Africa, and there's this fascinating stat that just keeps on going. Since around the year 2007, 2008, there's been a service delivery protest almost every single day in this country. Right? Kate Alexander describes it as the rebellion of the poor back in 2010. Her example still holds when we see the July unrest. The country is screaming for different forms of holding people accountable because the formal channels have stopped. So the question then becomes, when do the adults get to the table? Really? Like, when do the adults get to the table and say enough is enough? So when young people start asking, how do we get involved? Well, you're told get into politics. Well, if you get into politics, and I see all my friends across the parties, right? This is not ANC specific. This happens in the DA, it happens in the EFF, it happens in the IFP. It is the political culture. When you come in, you follow the rules of the party. The ANC just gets the biggest rap because of catered deployment and the negative stereotypes. It happens in the DA. We just saw that with Khalid Kachalia. We just saw it. If you don't toe the line, you get removed. So young people know this. So then the question is, okay, let me remove myself. Then you get into civil society. And civil society is its own interesting beast. And we could speak ages around that, but I think civil society, young people are realizing that civil society over the last 30 years has been okay with being non-political. For whatever reason, and young people are now asking, it's time for civil society to get off the fence, the same way they did in Brazil, the same way they did in Zambia just last year. It's not too far away. Around how you get organizations, civil society, standing up and saying, we're voting for these guys. But civil society refuses to engage in that game because we still want to be apolitical or non-political or non-partisan, whatever non you want to use, when we just don't have enough time. So then, cool, I can't do politics, I can't do civil society to get that change, that rapid change because we don't have time. So I go into the private sector, and all my friends go into private sector. If you're young black in the private sector, in a big company, they even answer for me. The entire system. So then the question is, let's then do it ourselves. And now you're being too radical. You're doing too much. Don't you see the Constitution says, we must do X, Y, Z like this. It's why I don't like when people I don't believe in land expropriation without compensation. But I hate the fact that people are touched on their studio when someone brings it up in conversation. Like, it frustrates my soul. Because that means you can't ever have a dialogue about fundamental structural change in this country unless it is predicated on the acceptance that the Constitution still holds tight the way it is. I love the Frederick van Zyl example. We, as Defend Our Democracy, are really trying to help out with electoral reform, and we've been tracing Frederick van Zyl in 2001, 2002. We then had a parliamentary committee to look at the internal processes of Parliament in 2004, 2005. Then you had another parliamentary process in 2009, then you had the Khalema Commission in 2014, 2015, all of these to review Parliament, and in particular, electoral reform in the country, right, to move to a constituency-based system, right, to say that this is how you incentivize, that people will directly vote for a person instead of a political party. Every single party across the spectrum, across the board, DA, ANC, IFP, all voted in the same way. We don't want change. Because they incentivize for the system to stay the same. So the question then becomes, how do you change a system when Parliament is unwilling to do that work? We need to wait for another Messiah. And I just don't have time to wait.
So will you be voting?
Oh, 100%. 100%. No. I am 100% voting, but my vote is a secret. Otherwise, my dad would be very, very angry with me.
So, Maria, this moment, lovely. Why is it a critical moment?
Well, I think I love this. I don't have time to wait. Let me pull together some of what they both said, which is in the end. And this is where I'll throw in the impact. You were talking about agency and individual will, values, morals, that driving force, right? But what if we don't have agency nor individual will? What if the big tech that connects all of us is literally insidiously manipulating us or allowing the insidious manipulation at scale, right? Which is, so on my end, 2024 is a year where if we do not get the right solutions in place globally for a very corrupted information ecosystem, we will not have integrity in elections. This is what we all have in common. So I think you said it is in the person. It is. And in looking at this, I always said we now are down to a person-to-person battle for the truth, for facts. Let me just not even use the word truth. Facts. It is person-to-person battle. It is a person-to-person battle for our values, our integrity. And that window is closing. You know, I lived through this because I was shocked by how quickly my country changed. So change can happen quickly, even if the establishment doesn't necessarily want it. And in our case, by 2016, so the difference, South Africa is 43% social media penetration. The Philippines is 100%. And in 2016, we were at 97% penetration rate, and everyone on the internet in the Philippines was on Facebook. Facebook was our internet. So it's very similar to what happened in Myanmar, right? When they moved to the digital phone, to the cell phone, all of a sudden Facebook was free. And what did it do? This is both the UN and Meta's own people went in and investigated and showed that this Facebook that we love, I drank the Kool-Aid. I started Rappler on Facebook, right? So you have to know, right? I know of what I speak. No, but they decided their investigation showed that Meta had enabled genocide, right? Why? Because it is at the fundamental, the cellular level of a democracy. Each person voting in a democracy who is on here. Because the way it works is that you, say you have 1,000 posts on Facebook or Twitter, now called X, Facebook, now called Meta, and machine learning comes in and builds a model of you. That model, replace the word model with clone. So we're each cloned, and then AI comes in and takes all of our clones, makes that the master database that is used to micro-target. Meaning, it is, you are for sale. Your weakest moment to a message, and that is sold to a company, advertising, or a country, information operations. In America, in 2016, 126 million Americans were reached by Russian disinformation. What did they hit? The fracture lines of society, race being one of them, right? So it goes back. We cannot afford to wait. And after, where do I begin? In 2016, I was attacked with 90 hate messages per hour. And women are attacked more. If you're marginalized in the real world, you are further marginalized online because there's coded bias in what was coming from Silicon Valley until China came in with TikTok, right? If we don't stop and put guardrails on big tech, we will lose our agency. And that is in addition to the complicated, nuanced work of coalition building, of collaborating to try to get the kind of democratic future we want. it's already had an impact on democracy globally. VDEM from Sweden said that as of last year, this time last year, 72% of the world is under authoritarian rule. 2024 is the tipping point for democracy. And for everything that is wrong with each of our real-world problems, it will get significantly worse when you are 100% on social media, when your penetration rate comes down. So you have strong civil society. You must already tap that. I guess I'll end again with, I learned a lot in the last few days I've been here, but that, Nelson Mandela is dead, now it is up to you. Well, that's true for you, but it is also true for every citizen in every democracy around the world. And in the book I wrote, How to Stand Up to a Dictator, when the pandemic lockdown happened, I couldn't leave. Well, we were all under lockdown, but at that point, before the Nobel, I couldn't travel outside the Philippines. This is nothing like what you have lived through here. Part of the reason I read the books I did was to prepare myself to get jailed, right? Like, how do I deal with it? And at that point, I had to face going to jail for over a century to keep doing my job. And it is okay. You keep doing your job because you think through the worst case scenario. But now we have this moment, and I go back to that. For all of it, do not give up hope, right? Because you are out of time, and I think that's where agency comes in. The last thing I'll say is I do think this is what we hope we will do with the world movement. I have two hats. I am the chair of the World Movement, the steering committee for the World Movement of Democracy, but I also co-chair the International Fund for Public Interest Media. In that one, South Africa is our second largest country where we've given grants. This is because independent media must survive this time period, right? And what we did is we went to governments for ODA, Overseas Development Assistance Funds. They were spending 0.3%. And we wanted them to get it to 1% into ODA for independent media. They haven't done that, but we did raise $50 million, which we have been giving out. So we've given out maybe $10 million of that. South Africa is our second largest country that we gave it to. Brazil was the largest. So you're on a cusp. I guess this is what. So use that. Your energy is incredible, and that's the energy that democracy needs, and democracy needs it now. It isn't the time for status quo.
I think you would agree with me. We've had some fantastic reflections and lines of inquiry. And I almost don't want to jump into the next movement of this day. Just to sit with all the wisdom that you've shared would be fantastic. I'm very mindful of time because there is another session specifically with media. So what I want to suggest is we do a quick round of feedback. Let's go around the room. Any thoughts, any critical questions you would like for this panel to respond to as they give a final reflection before we wrap up? So we could maybe take 7 or 8 views. I'm going to need this. I think there's... So there's one right over there. Anyone here? Oh, you've got it. Yeah. Okay, let's take those first and then we'll keep going.
Thank you very much to the panel.
I don't think it's working.
My name is Monica Springhill, and the question I'd like to ask the panel is how do we negotiate the dynamic between power and authority? Because I have seen MECs pretty confused about the mandate, wielding power without authority, or the technocrats who have authority without power. And I think both are just equally dangerous.
Thank you. Hands again. Let's take that one there and then there.
Good afternoon. My name is Estelle. I would like to make 2 points. The one is that the future of South Africa belongs to the men and the women that live in this country. Because for too long, the men have had, what's the word?
Hegemony.
Thank you. And our women, we have not been silent and we have not been unserved, but we have not taken the power that we've had. We've always left it to our husbands and our male brothers and the males in general to say, we give you permission. So that's my first comment. The future of South Africa belongs to the men and the women who live in it. My second thing is to ask Dr. Mamphela, when things are falling apart in South Africa, and we can all track it back to a particular year or a particular date, why did the leadership not call to task those persons, individuals, groups who were creating a mess? And my third comment is that South Africa's future also belongs to the youth and the young people who look past what is happening now. We've got to look at the bigger picture, because I agree with Maria. We've been manipulated through the technology and the media and what's written and said, and we're not questioning. Thank you.
Okay, there were two over here. Let's take those. Let's keep these reflections really tight so we can get a better sense of what the room is wanting from our panel.
Thank you. My name is Pepu Masina. I represent Situk Group Ecosystem, dealing particularly with student accommodation. So I deal with young people. And I must first say to you that as old as I am, I must clearly disclaim that I'm not one of the generation that will be in a revolution. But those that I accommodate born into the 2000 and 2006, the actions matter than we might all think. Now, I don't want to dwell much, but firstly I want to direct the question to Dr. Mamphela that I've followed for a better part of my life on the question of dialogues. To say, do we have a national dialogue as a country? No, we don't. I'm one of the privileged people who got to listen to the deliberation from the panel. But what about someone sitting in deep sweat? The message doesn't get across. And that has always been the fact. The second question will be the issue of civil society. I think fundamentally those who came before us did a serious mistake that we ought to acknowledge and rectify. The government in 1994 demobilized civil society. And I think we need to address that elephant in the room. To an extent that this freedom did not come because of politicians. It came because of men and women in the country who were tired of an unjust system. Now when we promise them freedom and demobilize them, we then have this sporadic civil society that comes in different shapes, but that do not address the national question and the crisis that is faced by the majority of our.
Let's give space.
So the question will be, what is to be done? And that is the question that was raised, I think in 1902 by Vladimir Lenin. What is it that we need to do as a country and the future of this country? And we need to respond to that question. So I'm asking from the panel, what is to be done to address these challenges so that the country does not collapse? Thanks.
Okay, so one here, then there's one there, and then we'll come to others before we go back to the panel.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ngulule Usbia. I'm a PhD candidate at Wits University. I think for me, the scariest thing is that I'm 42 years old, right? The scariest thing is to have been angry at an apartheid white government. And then having to be angry at my parents. Because it is our parents that occupy these positions, right? Some of us are very close to these people who occupy positions of power. And every time you are a child in the household, our politics in the country doesn't end here in the public space. There is the home where you get vilified for thinking differently, right? Young people have been doing so many things. The EFF exists because of young people who felt they need to pull away. Unfortunately, the existence of the EFF always gets rationalized to a radical, crazy Malema who's power hungry. If you were at the benches at Wits University and any other university and you saw the discourse and the politics change, you would know that young people are tired of their own parents juniorizing them. I'm a father of 3, but constantly I'm not given the right to even take my reins. In my home, I'm still a child. Coco is 92, 93, I'm still a child. We are doing things. Fees Must Fall wasn't just everything falling. Today, when you walk the grounds of Wits University, what do you see? You see workers wearing uniforms that say Wits University, not the private company that pulled them away from the benefits of being able to take your child into the varsity for free because you are a cleaner, you will never afford varsity. We marched to the union buildings, right? I was there, blisters and all. Doing is not fun. It's a tough job. We did it, right? We did it to the point that a president, whether he was, moved by the fact that he's losing power, he declared free education. We did it. We posed questions to the national anthem, to many things in this country. But we have our parents who keep on saying, this generation is doing nothing. We did A, B, and C, and. Thank you.
So I think we've got time for 3 more. So there's one there. Let's take you, and then this lastly, and then we go back to the panel. Sorry. It's not a democracy today.
Is it on? Good afternoon. I want to reflect, thank you for the panelists, I want to reflect a second on something that Dr. Ramphele said, which is, when you're feeling lost, go home. But what happens when home does not feel like home? What happens when home is not safe, comfortable, stable, where you can't earn, and when you're paying above your means to send your child to a private school up the street, which is safe, but perpetuates inequality as well. That's my reality. I was born in 1982. My father left here in exile in 1961, came back in 1991, died in 2010. Tomorrow, Valentine's Day, makes 14 years since I came home. But I'm not home. I feel uncomfortable. I feel unsafe. And with that, I want to turn over to my daughter, who has a question after I have given my context, because we're talking about voices of youth. I'm no longer youth, I'm 42. She is.
Hello. My name is Hila Galeta. I'm a citizen of this country and of the United States. My generation has been exposed to many things, including current corruption and many other important parts of our government, so we can prepare us for the future while letting us have time to be a kid, to make sure when us, as the generation of voters, politicians, and other members of the law, are ready to face corruption. Thank you.
Thank you. So, here and then here. Thanks very much.
Hi everyone. My name is Mashako. I come from the Nobel Foundation. And I just want to reflect on 2 points from the panel. Firstly, the point of self-determination and humanity. I always pinpoint myself at the center of these conversations because a couple of years ago, if someone asked me about the electoral system in South Africa and the role of independent parties, I would have said, oh, that's utterly impossible because our political system is so rigid, right? So I'd like to say, firstly, as a young person, that was my first problem. that I did not center myself, because I'm sitting in this room, right? It means I'm at some level of being a decision maker. Therefore, I'm some level of a different story to the inequality, right? And secondly, to the point of meaningful participation that hold politicians to account. I think the question for us usually is who's supposed to create it then, if not us, right? I was in Parliament at the age of 25, and I'm ashamed to say I was a master's graduate, and I had no idea the importance of Parliament in this country, right? I only got to understand those systems when I entered Parliament, because I was lucky enough to be in Parliament. If we look at the average mean age of people who watch Parliament and understand the systems, I'm pretty sure it's at 50-something, right? So my comment in this room at the Nelson Mandela Foundation is exactly that. To what extent do we centralize ourselves in each and every challenge that we have? At RMF, we're always doing work to say, how do we reinstill the national pride in South Africa? Because we're always faced with the reimagination conversation because of who Ronima Moepa was. And our answer is always, for a young person to reimagine the country, you must show that young person the possibilities of this country. And I think that takes me to the panelist's point of breaking the barriers of access, right? I can sit and say, oh, Parliament's mean age is 60, but I'm also in Parliament and I was there at 25. So what do I do with that power is the question that I have today for the panel and everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Last word to you.
Thank you very much. My name is Gladys Changachirere. I am from Zimbabwe. I work with an activist organization called Institute for Young Women Development. I also coordinate a regional network promoting young women's participation in politics on the continent called African Women Leaders Forum. But I'm here today on the ticket of the World Movement for Democracy, where I'm a member of the steering committee. My question goes to Dr. Mamphele. I really appreciate having met you in person. I really appreciate the work that you've done, not only for South Africa, but for the greater continent of Africa and its women. So you've talked about the analogy of drivers who have been instructed or accorded an opportunity to drive a Rolls Royce, whose mechanism they didn't understand, whose route they didn't understand it's supposed to take. And as you have this conversation today, you have challenged young people to say, forget about the past. Focus on the opportunities today. Pick up the Rolls Royce. Drive it forward. So my question is, for the drivers of the Rolls Royce who I imagine, those who are in this room and those who are in Zimbabwe, we are going to convene here in November for the World Movement for Democracy Global Assembly. And we're going to have young people coming from South Africa, but also from Zimbabwe and many other countries across the globe. What is one conversation, Dr. Mamphele, that you recommend that we have, which you consider an urgent conversation for young people that you're challenging to take on those Rolls Royce, whose mechanism they don't understand, to have as they gather in November, not only for South Africa, but an urgent conversation that you feel the greater Southern Africa and the greater African continent can benefit from, given that the analogy of the Rolls Royce is actually cross-cutting across many African countries. Thank you.
So thank you, friends. I think we've got a sense of where it's landing in the room. Apologies, we couldn't get to everybody. So if you would like to respond to a specific question or just respond to what you are feeling in the room, but also a final reflection that you would want all of us to take away with us. So I'm going to start with you, Doc.
Well, this has been a very rich afternoon, and I'm feeling privileged to have been here and to hear the different perspectives. The first point I would like to make, and this is in perhaps response to what is the one thing, I still get back to it, which is, what does it mean to be human? I hear people talking about being non-political, excuse me, to be human is to be in relationships. And one of those relationships is political, some economic, some spiritual. You cannot escape politics. There is no such thing as non-political, because human beings have to order the context in which they exist, and that brings us to dialogue. I hear you, Maria, about meta blah blah. I think we are called on this continent to return to the technology of our ancestors. You know, when the British first arrived here, they found adults sitting the whole day under a tree in a circle. Wow, these are lazy bones. They were doing the work of building relationships, building trust, sharing views, building consensus. I hear you about political parties. I think you are wrong about they were different in 94 as to today. It's just a question of what did you see. You know, it's like elephant tail or the paw or whatever. Right. I am going to make a statement which is probably going to get people to send me to that other place. I want to make bold a statement that party politics is inappropriate for this continent. After all of those years of looking at the operations of party politics, it's the same everywhere except in the so-called global north. Because party politics is designed for competition, is designed for dominance. And if you look at the world, whether you look at G7, you're looking at G whatever, many, right? Yet we know on this continent, which is the cradle of humanity and the cradle of civilization, women were regarded as superior beings. Not that I agree that they are, but because it took a while for human beings to figure out where people came from. These women brought another human being to life. Where did they find this? So they thought, this must be goddesses. They're close to the gods. So I'm saying this to get back to this issue of what does it mean to be human? A truly free, self-liberated person, man or woman, is one who puts at the center of conversations, interests, and whatever, human dignity, respect for human beings. The same way you want to be treated, you must treat other people. And I hear this story about being juniorized, vilified. I think it's tragic that happens. And oftentimes it's because the parents are out of their depths. There's no school for training how to be a parent. And I learned the hard way. Fortunately, my children had grown back. They just said no. And I had to learn how to parent in a new environment because I was supportive of them being self-liberated. But the models of parenting, not just in South Africa, everywhere in the world, have not evolved to the point where we can in fact create this kind of home as a safe place, home as a place of comfort. We lost the opportunity or the custom of sitting around a circle and eating together and talking about it. We are eating and somebody is, oh yeah, they're looking at the soccer match or a rugby match. So I really do believe we have to return to this question of what does it mean to be human. We are not animals. We are part of the animal kingdom, but a kingdom, we are a species that cannot survive without social and other emotional relationships. The second point I want to make is we should not underestimate the impacts of being treated as inferior. For both women who are treated as nothings and generations of African people who were treated as nothing. the dark continent, a continent without history. Having said that, I'm not a victim. We had to figure it out without guidance from our parents. And I'm not saying that to say we are special. We were under pressure because we were so humiliated and we wanted to put a stop to that. And believe you me, once we got that done and I woke up to it, I said, wow, I'm not just black and proud, I'm a woman. What? You're dividing the struggle. I said, okay, divide me into Mamphela, the black person, Mamphela. No, I am a package. That's what it means to be human. We have to celebrate who we are, what we bring to the table. And when we do that, believe you me, life is, it's tough to look at what we have missed. But what keeps me going is celebrating all of you and all of life. And so, yes, this is the moment that we are going to rise up, and we don't need any permission, we don't need any participatory process. We are it. We don't have to get permission from Parliament or from the Constitution. We just stand up as we did. This is what brought freedom to this country, not a gun. The people standing up to say, enough is enough.
Yeah, I'll be very quick. So there were a few questions. There was one question that I found fascinating. I don't know how to answer it, about how do you negotiate power and authority. I mean, I can give you like the real public policy answer about technocrats and how the types of rules you put into place. But there's really two things. One, Frantz Fanon nailed it, man. And his work around reimagining what the master-slave dialectic looks like when you input race into the equation fundamentally changes the way you associate authority and power. In more modern terms, I never know how to say this guy's name. Dave Ashimoglu and James Robinson wrote a fascinating book, came out like a couple of years ago, called The Narrow Corridor, that talks about how you shackle the state. Right, that the state shouldn't just run rampant. That this Leviathan that just like rampages through the wild and we have no control about it, and that the fight in society is about how you shackle the state. And that is when you allow the state to have power and when you allow it to have authority. It's a very interesting dynamic, so I'll leave that there. You know, every time people gather, everyone wants to have a national dialogue. You know, my knee-jerk reaction is to say, but why weren't you at the one last year? Or the one organized by that person, or the one organized by that person. There are a ton of national dialogues happening in the country, across the board. Gabriso trusts just held a meeting of like 300 civil society organizations from across the country 4 months ago, didn't even touch the surface around shifting the dialogue on how civil society is engaging with each other. People are having conversations. That's not up for debate. The real problem is that our conversations never connect to something bigger. And that's the fault of civil society to an extent, it's the fault of our system. And I think there's a need to say, how do we bring all the different national dialogues that are happening, national dialogues that are happening about the state of the country, and how do they feed into a centralized process? And in my mind, that just means an organization with trust, with values that people can hold on to put up its hand and say, we'll be the ones who do it for everyone else. But then you need money, and people don't get money for that. So that's a story for another day. The question of what is to be done, very straightforward. I think I'm 33 years old. If you're young, our biggest, most tangible fight right now, in my mind, I could be wrong, people will disagree with me, electoral reform is our biggest fight right now. It is the quickest way to short-circuit the system. And if Parliament is allowed to railroad this process again, then we have to take Parliament to the Constitutional Court and tell the Constitutional Court that there's a conflict of interest here. and that we need to have a referendum on this issue to allow citizens to decide on it. That's the quickest way, it's the quickest shortcut that I can imagine to essentially short-circuit the system that is incentively built in a way that isn't meant to shift the move. And that debate is happening over the next 2.5 years. We don't have time, right? Over the next 2.5 years, we're going to be having this discussion in Parliament about electoral reform, and every young person needs to educate themselves on what are the options, what we want to push, and what type of referendum we would want. There was a really amazing question about, I think it was around corruption. I forget her name. Yes. I wish I knew how to end corruption in this country. But it sucks because I don't, and I see my friends becoming corrupt. You know, it's a weird thing watching your friend become corrupt in front of your eyes. Right? Because it doesn't just happen overnight. You watch the small decisions that they make. And I always use this example of, if you're young, you'll know this place. Rockets Man in Bryanston. For those who know Rockets Man in Bryanston, it is a club. It is a bar. But the amount of nefarious political dealings that are solidified in Rockets Man in Bryanston is ridiculous. And only young people are there. We're talking about young leaders who are talking in one meeting on a Sunday in a meeting saying, we want to liberate the country, we don't want to provide this and this and this and this and this. And then that following night are spending 80,000 Rand on alcohol, just like this. But I know their job, they don't have 80,000 Rand for alcohol, how are they affording that? It's insane. I had a fight with the ANC Youth League many years ago about quickest way to short circuit, one member, one vote. You get rid of patronage networks within the system overnight. We were told that's a ridiculous idea. Fast forward 6 years later, the ANC is finally debating this and it's not a national conflict. It lost, but they're now debating because they're realizing that there's something endemic about corruption that starts at an early age. Really young for some reason. And it's really depressing because all of them then become leaders. And they talk wild, and they smile, and they charm us into believing that they're different. But they know that there's only 1 out of 10, really. And the question for me is then how do you convince people not to go down that path right at the beginning? And again, political culture has to change. And I don't know how you change it outside of a political party. So if you're in a political party, please change it as much as possible. And then just one last thing, and I know we're over time. I really like this metaphor of the Bentley, because it's so apt. It's so Rolls Royce.
Now we know what you
same
want.
WhatsApp.
That's what you want.
A Rolls Royce, Bentley, same thing. The assumption is that we have a tarred road to drive on. Right? You can have whatever drive you want, but the assumption is that there's a tarred road. The context of our country, the inequality, the poverty, the gender-based violence, the unemployment, these systemic issues. Oh, I was about to swear. It is a gravel road at best, where Santon has tar, but the majority of us are driving on gravel. So then what is the point of a Rolls Royce in that situation? When you should really just have a kind, just a truck. That's really what you need. And then how do you make that transition from a Rolls Royce to a truck in a manner that is not violent? That's my real big thing. When I say we don't have time, it's not because I'm anxious. It's because I can see at some point it will explode. July 2021 was like a dress rehearsal of what is possible if someone really wants to commit to the idea of unrest in the country. The playbook was there. It happened overnight. It is very simple. People now know how to shut down this country if they really, really wanted to. And the worst thing is that you only need a couple hundred of people because the thousands of unemployed young people who can't self-determine will do the work for you.
So I'll pick up 3 points, and those were fantastic questions. I think anger and violence. I think there was a report that came out this week that is one of the risks South Africa faces. But please remember, anger and violence destroys. fear, anger, hate destroys. It doesn't create. This is a time to create. So to pick up on our humanity, right? There are two systems of thinking for all of us. Daniel Kahneman wrote a great book, Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow. Thinking slow is the process of journalism, it is the process of democracy, it is the process of civil society. But we cannot think slow when what connects all of us, and this is in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we need other people, we need connections, but that connection is corrupted. So it actually is on a feedback loop to be mildly addictive to us, right? And we feel good at it. So if the worst part of humanity is getting rewarded in this incentive structure, we must move further. This is where civil society, I think, needs to be stronger and move us into the physical world and make us collaborate. Collaborate, 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 because silence is consent. I say this all the time in the Philippines, but there's also a saying in Indonesia, the nail that stands up gets the hammer. I always tried not to be the nail, but but silence is consent. So even if this goes back to our agency at this moment in time and back to what you had said, right? What are you going to do? Because I think if we commit, and I'm not just concerned about South Africa, I'm really concerned about the values of democracy, rule of law, which we're all dealing with now, right? South Africa took a firm commitment to that. And this is the solution. What do we do about it? It isn't government alone. It isn't journalists alone. It isn't civil society. It is in the Philippines. And let me remind you of the Philippines at the worst moment in time when we had a dictator who had killed people, jailed journalists, and was sending tanks to all the people protesting in our main thoroughfare. Humanity won out. We had a peaceful people power revolt. It is possible. Now, of course, having said that, we just elected his son, Marcos Jr., as our president in May 2022, and that is part of it is a generational change, people who didn't remember our history and watched our history change in front of our eyes. This is why this is important. You need to know your history. And then the last part of it is the whole of society approach, right? That's the solution. You know where you want to go. We will find our way there, each of our countries. But corruption, I am sad to say, is a problem in every country I have reported on, including you saw the Supreme Court problems in the United States where they have things that we've never seen before. So I guess I'm saying that we grapple with the best of humanity. You have him actually laying that out, and then try to minimize the worst of what we are. Use the anger for good, if that's possible.
Well, thank you, everyone. I'll hand back now to our program director, just to say that line of inquiry around home I found really helpful. Is it possible that home is not where we come from? It's not where we are, it's where we're going to. And if that's right, then we should never stop working hard to make sure that that home is where we actually want to find ourselves. Thanks so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please give our panelists a great round of applause. I must say, fascinating debate, and I think the most incredible thing is that freedom allows us to confront challenging times, and we can have these dialogues and these conversations openly so, without being fearful of arrests or anything that may attack us for confronting the challenges that are facing us today. So with that said, I would actually just like to invite Ms. Maria Ressa, the chairperson of the World Movement for Democracy Steering Committee, to come forward and give us a closing remark for the day. Thank you.
I'm going to pretend to be tall. I never do well behind the podium. I always have to tiptoe there. So first of all, what an incredible panel. Thank you so much. And again, thank you to our South African partners who really, in the last few days, have shown us so much. We are having the global movement for democracy here in South Africa on November 20 to 22. Why is that important to you? Because the problem of democracy is global. And with 500 activists, journalists, human rights groups, environmental groups coming in, all of these things that we just talked about have to do with systems of governance, but they have to do with each of us as people making that choice, right? So we want to celebrate your 30 years with you. We want to have the most fantastic election results that you would have when your elections are called, right? Our theme is rebuilding democracy, resilience, reflection, and innovation. Rebuilding democracy. And we will coordinate this global assembly along with our South African partners in government and civil society, and I want to name some of them. The Ahmed Kathrada Foundation, Defend Our Democracy, Desmond and Leah Tutu Legacy Foundation, MISTRA, Human Rights Institute of South Africa, In Transformation Initiative, the Ronnie Mamuka Foundation. I've had an incredible time. Thank you so much for opening your hearts.
Thank you, Maria. So I think one critical point was mentioned that civil society needs to start taking more decisive action. Let's stop sitting on the fence and being apolitical. Let's start confronting the monster in the room, and let's start calling out our own friends, like Richie Kali is putting it. So, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, the store, the Goodwill Collection store, is open and it will close at 7 o'clock. You can grab yourself some memorabilia in there. You go outside of the main door and you turn to your right, and then you'll find the store there. This brings us to the end of our program for today. We will be serving and having a cocktail session downstairs. So please, let's network, let's exchange ideas. Let's build up to an incredible, fascinating, challenging November debate this year, so that the World Movement for Democracy really sort of shapes the global dialogue around what freedom truly means and how we as young people, I always put myself as a young person even though I'm a father of two, but I think what's important is that the elderly did something during their times when they were young, and it's about time for them to also let go and let the young people make the decisions that they feel are fit for purpose in the now, because they were challenging a status quo that was not working and was not purposeful for their time. So I think with that, the elders in the room, we appreciate the intergenerational dialogues. We need to continue having them so that we can learn from one another and reshape the narrative of this country. Thank you.